My name is Grayce A. Hi, everybody. I'm going to do something. I'm a nonconformist anyway. You know, we're not nearly as restless, irritable, and discontented as they are. But we've been here for 2 hours. Why doesn't everybody just stand up and stretch? Okay, now we got to get ready to get ready. It's truly by the grace of God that I am a member of the Al-Anon Fellowship, and I am delighted to be here. I want to thank Rennis, first of all, for all of her wonderful phone calls and her mail and her welcoming, everything about it, and everybody has been so very, very friendly. Thank you. Thank you for the lovely basket in my room, and for the little gal who calls herself a newcomer that did the plaques and their beautiful job. She's 2 years already in the program. She's no newcomer. She's an old-timer now. And I want to thank my son for being here. I'd like you to meet Don. Stand up, honey. And I have a surrogate son from Indianapolis who's here also. David was his sponsor, and Jimmy drove down to be with us. Thanks, Jim, for being with us. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we're like now. And I grew up in Denver, Colorado, and I grew up in a wonderful home. There was no drinking. Mom and Dad were great parents. I had 2 brothers, and we had a lot of fun growing up. We did a lot of things together as a family. And Dad was one of 9, Mother was one of 7, so we had a lot of family things going on. Lots of cousins and just great. And our house was a hangout for everybody. All the kids hung out there all the way through school. 2 of my girlfriends graduated from my house. They moved in with us. And there was just always something going on, and it was always good. And when I got to you people forever in later years, and had to write a 4th step, take a 5th step, which I didn't do gleefully. They told me to go back and, as far as I could remember, and write down everything. And as far back as I could remember, everything was great until I ran headlong into a drunk. And then things started changing. How well we know that in here. I graduated high school at age 16, and I went on to the University of Colorado. Not for an education. I went to have a good time. I went to have fun, and I had discovered boys in junior high school, decided I liked them better than I did girls. I haven't changed my mind a whole lot about that. And I went looking for him. And he was going to be 6'4", and he was going to be an All-American football player. My father had been a football player for the university and started taking me to football games when I was 4 years old. And I grew up loving the sport and would have played if women were allowed to do it, I'm sure. And that was the fantasy. And, you know, fantasies don't always become reality, do they? Everything was going along great in school. I was having a good time and dating and just having fun, barely making my grades because I really didn't care. And December of 41, and it was certainly brought to mind the last few weeks of what it was like then for those of us who are old enough to remember. And we on campus we were panicked, absolutely and totally panicked, because we didn't know what to expect. We had never been in a war. We knew that we were going to just be wiped out, number one, and my greatest concern was that all the fellows were going to disappear. They were going to be called to active duty. They were going to enlist, and we'd become an all-girl campus, and I am now 17 years old, and I'm going to be an old maid. And that was a great deal to worry about. one of my classmates was from Dallas, and she invited me to spend the Christmas holidays with her family. And on the train going down, she told me I would be going out with her brother's best friend. Go out with him, have a good time. Just don't believe anything he says. And you know where that went, right in here and right out there. We got off of the train, and there was a little guy standing there, 5'6". He took us to my friend's home, and we went out that night. We went out every night for the next 2 weeks. And after coming to you people, we realized, we started talking, we didn't go anywhere. There was a drive-in a short few blocks from where my friend lived, and they served beer and ale in the car. And he introduced me to ale. That is the rottenest stuff to this day that I have ever put in my mouth. It was horrible. But we sat in the car, I pretended to like it, drank it, and we lied to each other. That was our dating. I went back to school in 2 weeks, and I went back with wonderful thinking, cunning mind that we do have, because this young man was in school, and he was going to be allowed to finish his education. And I thought, well, he's one that's not going to go anywhere, and by the time we're through with this war, he won't have to go, and I better see what I can do. I believe it's called manipulation in here. I wrote to him and didn't hear from him. And after the third letter and no response, I didn't need to hear from him because campus had become military. We were surrounded. Denver was military. It was a very exciting, fun time. All that fear went somewhere. We were over that because we had at least 10 fellas to every gal. And let me tell you something. I loved the military. We had Army, we had Navy, we had Marines, and we had Air Force. I never did find out what the Navy was doing in Colorado, but they were there. And sometimes you'd have 3 or 4 dates in one night because we had to keep the guys happy and we didn't have enough girls to go around. And I started falling in love. I had absolutely no idea what love was, but I thought I did. He'd ship out and somebody'd take his place, another would ship out and take his place. And it went on like that until an invitation arrived to go back to Dallas to be in a wedding. And I arrived on the same train, the same little guy was waiting for me. And he was in the wedding party. We went through all the wedding festivities and went right back to that drive-in and drank that rotten ale. And we lied to each other. At the end of 2 weeks, I went back to school and wrote to him and didn't hear from him and said, forget it. Until another invitation arrived to go back to Dallas for another wedding. And he met the train, and this time, before I went back to school, I had a fraternity pin. And we had plans to be married some 2.5 years later. That was in January, and April a ring arrived in the mail, and June the 10th, 1943 at 8 o'clock p.m., a formal wedding, surrounded by family, by friends, and the realization I know of what both sets of our parents believed and hoped for us and what we did for ourselves. And everything was going to be wonderful. He was still in school, and we had 3 days for a honeymoon, and we went up to the mountains, and there wasn't anything wrong with us at all. You understand this, all these years ago. We had a beautiful lodge for a brief honeymoon. We checked in, and we turned right around, got in the car, and drove back to Denver so we could go dancing. We did that the 3 nights that we were there. And we went, after the 3 nights, we got on the train, we went back to Dallas, and Dave went back to school, and I went to work. And we had everything going for us that any young couple could ever hope for. We didn't have much money. We didn't need much money. We had a little apartment, and everything was going great. Every time we had a few dollars extra, we bought a bottle. And every time we bought a bottle, he drank too much. And when he drank too much, I was furious. Why couldn't he drink like so-and-so? Why did he have to behave like that when nobody else did? Of course, I couldn't see anybody else's behavior but his. You see, I was powerless over alcohol over 58 years ago, and my life was unmanageable, and I did not have any idea. I just didn't understand. I did not come from alcoholism. I had never known anyone with a problem drinker. I knew nothing about it, and he didn't either. He didn't come from it, and he didn't know anything about it. And we started way back then blaming people, places, and things. And we are so good at that. On the if-onlys and the yes-buts, you don't understand. How in the world can anybody understand if we ourselves don't understand? David had graduated from Southern Methodist University, and he was enrolled in Baylor University College of Dentistry. He was a native Dallasite. He was born and raised and educated right in the city. And he finished his education at Baylor and was in the Navy Reserve, and he was serving a residency in one of our local hospitals. And he had to live in. And I had a little one-room apartment a couple of blocks away. He had a pass once a month, so we could be together once a month, and we would party. And this particular weekend, we borrowed his mom's car because we didn't have one, and we went to a fraternity dance. We looked forward to it. We were going to see a lot of the people we hadn't seen in a while. And we were home about an hour later. We don't remember exactly how long, but not too long after. And my apartment was at the top of a stairwell that went straight up like so. And I had to get behind him to keep him from falling. And as we got to the top of the landing, he passed out. Now, that whole landing wasn't much bigger than this podium. And for one fleeting instant, you know what I wanted to do. It would have been a very simple situation. I'm a big gal. He was 5'6". I was an athlete. I was a swimmer, tennis player, and showed horses. And it would have been very easy. I didn't do it. I drug him in by his heels, left him passed out in the middle of the floor, and when he came to the next morning, he wanted to know what happened. And I looked at him with all the anger and the resentment that I could, and I said, guess. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. There was absolutely no sound thinking or judgment in my mind that night, or for many, many nights to come. He was not allowed to finish the residency. He was in Navy Reserve, and he was called to active duty. I was able to go with him. We had fantastic duty. We started out at Treasure Island out of San Francisco and ended up at Coronado Naval Air Station in Coronado. He was aboard a small aircraft carrier, and we were having a ball. We really were. We partied, we played, we drank, we fought, and we made up. And we did this night after week after month. We had more money than we ever had. He'd been declared an officer and a gentleman, so we were really living it up. And every time we had an argument, we were always so sorry the next day. And you know how we are. It isn't going to ever happen again. And it happens again and again and again. And we don't understand. We don't understand. How can we when we know nothing about the disease of alcoholism? That it's cunning, baffling, and powerful. That one drink is too many and a carload's not enough. We don't have any idea. And so we blame one more time on people, places, and things. And the if only, if only, if only. He was released after 19 months from active duty, and we went back to Dallas, opened our first office. I went to work for him, and we were there for 5 years. We built our first home. Our 2 sons were born. We had always planned on 6 children. Today I say thank you, God. He certainly knew better than we. We had, again, everything going for us that any 2 young people could hope for. Very successful. Making a lot of money and spending more and more. Late Norm from California used to say we spent money we didn't have to buy things we didn't need to impress people we didn't even know. And that's basically what we did. We partied, we played, we drank, we fought, and we made up. We had a live-in housekeeper for the children because I had to be free to be with him. Unbelievable. Because there was nothing wrong with me when I got to you people. Of course there wasn't. It was only him. If only he'd shape up. Always somebody else. I didn't know till I got here that every time I point a finger, I have 3 pointing back, and always will. So I better take a good, long, hard look at this gal before I say a thing in the world about anyone else. At the end of 5 years, we were bankrupt. Every area of our lives, financially, spiritually, maritally, emotionally, you name it. It was just a mess. And Uncle Sam came along to relieve the burden. Dad was recalled during the Korean conflict, and we were absolutely delighted because we really felt that by the time he served his time, things would be better, things would be different, not knowing that we were dealing with a progressive illness, that it doesn't ever get better, that it only gets worse, that it's downhill all the way. It was decided the children and I would stay in Dallas because he didn't think he'd be gone very long. He was gone 2 weeks when he called and wanted to know how soon we could join him. Well, of course, you know, the house went on the market, the furniture went into storage, the housekeeper was placed with another family, and the kids and I were on our way to California. Once again, California duty. This time, he was attached to the Marines, Camp Pendleton. And we had a lovely place to live in Oceanside, California, which back then was a very small town of 2,500 people and beautiful. A great, wonderful place to have 2 little guys. I could take them to the beach every day and do things that normies did with their children. And then at night, hire a babysitter so we could party and play and drink and fight and make up. Now, we never had physical battles in our home. And I know David thanked God for this until the day he died, because I'm not sure he would have made it if we had had physical in our home. I was talking to one of the Al-Anons this morning and talking about rage, and I was so filled with it. I was so filled with anger because I didn't know what I was dealing with. I know today that every time the man I lived with promised me that it wouldn't happen again, that he meant it. He meant it. But he didn't have a way out or a way up, and neither did I. Neither did I. Alcoholism is so insidious, and so effective on all family and friends. Let's not ever forget that. He was sent to Hawaii on temporary duty, and the kiddos and I remained in San Clemente. And he told me when he left not to worry about a thing, that he got paid twice a month and he'd send his check home, and it didn't occur to me to question him till it didn't arrive. And I couldn't understand it, so I called him in Hawaii, and he couldn't understand it because it was mailed yesterday. And I waited. It didn't arrive. I called him back. It was mailed yesterday, and it didn't arrive. I went to the base legal officer. Now, I did not go to get a divorce. I did not go to leave. I went to embarrass this man, and I did. I humiliated him because he was threatened with a court-martial, and I was happy as a lark. That'll show him. He won't ever pull anything over on me again. My phone rang one morning about 3 o'clock in the morning, and the ship was going to tie up in San Diego, and he wanted the children and me to be there. And of course, there wasn't any way I was going to go until I woke up the kids and dressed them in their Sunday best and headed for San Diego. And watched Dad get off the ship. And all the anger that I'd been building against him while he was gone went right out into the Pacific. You and I in this room know where it went. Went right down in this hole that every one of us have, whether we be AA or Al-Anon, because we don't have any place to get rid of that resentment until we get here. And we get to steps 4, 5, 6, and 7. And we are relieved of that. It takes a long time. So out to the Pacific I tossed that because Dad was home, and he got off the ship and he had on his dress whites, and he looked good. And if you've ever seen an officer, a naval officer in dress whites, you know what I'm talking about. They looked just grand. We went right back to our little town of San Clemente, and we partied and we played and we drank and we fought and we made up. And then his division was sent to the Far East. And it was at this point in time that the children and I moved to Denver to be close to Mother and Dad and the rest of our family. And we didn't think he'd be gone very long. It turned into 3 years. And it was 3 years of desertion. And I'd love to stand up here and tell you that I grew wings and a halo, and I was just precious. And I'd be lying through my teeth. Because I was going to set out and I was going to show him. One way or another. I tried to get a divorce. I couldn't because he couldn't be served. So I did the next best thing. I had access to all of the officers' clubs, and I made darn good use of them. Loved them. Lowry Air Force Base became my favorite hangout. And I loved the bar out there. Had a short end of the bar here, a long end of the bar here. And I would walk in, I'd order a drink. Pretty soon there'd be a drink in front of me. Pretty soon there was someone lighting my cigarette. And pretty soon you're gazing into one another's eyes and you know what happens. God, it's instant love. It's wonderful. I'm not the only one that's done that. Some of you gals have shared and you've done the same thing. And it's okay. It's okay. I don't recommend it. It didn't take me very long to meet him. He was going to send me to Mexico for an illegal divorce. I darn near took him up on it. Went to family friends, our physician and his wife, and they were like second parents, and told them what I was doing and what I planned to do, and of course they were wonderful. They said, "We understand, honey. We don't blame you." Every one of us in Al-Anon know what that is. The last thing in the world we need is sympathy, but we sure do get it. We play it for all it's worth, and that was all I needed to hear from them. But they did make a wonderful suggestion. Get out a piece of paper and a pencil and put this man on one side and David on the other. And I did what they suggested. You know what I had? I had one in Denver and one in the Far East. I didn't know what they were, but they were exactly alike. I introduced him to one of my former classmates, and 10 days later they were married. That'll give you an idea. Right back out to the officers' club I went, and there he was, Mr. Wonderful. He was a colonel. He had just been shipped back from Korea. From colonel, you go to general. And if you don't think the fantasy went wild within me, it did, because I figured, this is it. I'll be the greatest general's wife the Air Force has ever had. I did not pay one bit of attention to what he told me the first or second night that I was with him, and that was that he had been shipped back from Korea due to a drinking problem. All he needed, of course, in his life was stability, and here I was, with a built-in family, and everything was going to be wonderful. I became frightened of the way I was living. It was not the way I was raised. I've told you about how many aunts and uncles I had. Grandparents, both sets of grandparents, settled in Colorado in the late 1800s. I couldn't go anywhere without running into one or more family members, and never one time did they ever say, "Grayce, you should not, you ought not, you're embarrassing us." Thank God. Because when I got to you people, and I got to steps 8 and 9, and made my amends, they were pretty well finished, except when it came to my immediate family. And thanks to a loving sponsor. And I said, "Bunny, I really don't know what to do about Mother and Dad and my brothers and their families." And she was the most gentle, kind woman that I've ever known. The exact opposite of me. She never said a word of profanity in her life, and never lost her cool. I mean, she just was so gentle and taught me so much about patience and about tolerance. She said, "Honey, has it ever occurred to you to go to your family and say thank you for loving you when you were not lovable, for accepting you when your behavior was unacceptable?" And of course that had not occurred to me. And I was able to go to my family with that. And you know what? They didn't know what the heck I was talking about. They kept on loving me just the way I was. How blessed we are. How blessed we are. You know, if you've ever tried to get rid of a drunk, you know what happens. 2 days, they're back. 2 weeks, they're back. 2 years. Whatever. They're going to show back up. And we have a choice in here. There was a workshop on that this morning, and I missed it. But I talk about choices all the time. Because every one of us, whether we be AA or Al-Anon, have a choice. Alateens don't have the choice that we have, because they have to be cared for. But we have a choice to live with or live without. Live with them and accept the consequences, or live without them and accept the consequences. There's the simplicity of it. I have this suggestion to make. If you get rid of him, you better be darn careful. You don't know what you're going to get with the next one. Well, you know what you have with this one. And I haven't ever taken that gamble yet. Life plays very strange tricks on us. my phone rang one day, and you know who, and he was in California, and he wanted me to fly out there and see if we couldn't put this thing back together, and of course there was no way I was going. Till the next day. And I had divorce papers drawn up in Dallas, which was legal residence, and I was going to deliver them and get on the next plane and go back home and get on with the business of living. And I got off of the plane in Oakland, California, and he was standing there in his dress blues, and he looked good. As old as I am, I'm a sucker for uniforms, I'm going to tell you that. We went into the bar and had a drink, and we went on into the city, and we had a few more drinks, and I went back home, back to Denver a few days later to wait for Dad to be released from active duty and start all over. We opened an office in Dallas, but we didn't stay very long. We decided we wanted the boys to grow up in a small community. We moved out toward the Texas Panhandle to a small town of Crowell, Texas. We had less than 1,000 people. We didn't figure very well because we darn near starved to death. And then a practice opened in Memphis, Texas, which was just 89 miles from Amarillo, Texas. And it had a former professor of my husband's had given up that practice, and we took it over. And we moved to Memphis. Bag and baggage. We were there 8 years. You in this room know what we were doing. We had no idea. It's called a geographic. You know, it's always going to be better across the street, around the block, next week, next month. Only alcoholism doesn't ever get any better. It only gets worse. And we didn't know that. We were taking us with us every place we went. Now, I loved that community, and they loved and accepted us in its entirety. I give a great deal of credit to that community because of the way our sons turned out, because it was a fine place to live, and it was a fine place for young people to grow up. At the end of 8 years, we were once more bankrupt. Every area. And David called and he said, I think we ought to move back to Dallas. And I said, how soon? And we were gone 2 weeks later. We lied to those beautiful people in that town and told them we were going because his folks needed us. They didn't. His little dad had retired, and he and Grandma were doing all the things on retirement that they'd ever planned. They didn't need a drunk son, a confused daughter-in-law, and 2 mixed-up grandsons, but they got us. And today I thank the God of my understanding that allowed these 2 people to live long enough to know a sober son and see a family putting their lives back together one day at a time through this magnificent fellowship. We still had 3 more years of drinking, and during those 3 years I did it all. I went to work immediately. I had a very fine job. I was self-supporting through my own contributions. I didn't need him. I could have left one more time at any hour of any day. I made the choice to stay, and I don't regret it. I don't regret it. I was on my, during those 3 years, as I say, I did it all. And I know I'm not alone. I would lie in bed at night and plan his murder. I planned the perfect murder. I don't talk about it from the podium anymore because somebody might be sicker than I. I planned my own suicide. I never planned to kill myself all the way. Working in his office, I knew a great deal about medication, and back then the detail men, salesmen, used to leave every kind of new drug on the market. They'd take it in and drop a box of it into the lab. And thank God David never got into that. But I did. I would go over and steal the medication because I was going to use it either on him or on me. And I had quite a stash. And I was feeling real depressed one day or one night. That's a good expression for poor me, why me, how can he do this? I sent the kids to their grandparents, and I overdosed on a sleeping pill. I planned to kill myself all the way. He was going to come home and find me knocked out, and he was going to be sorry. Well, I woke up the next morning with the only hangover I've ever had, and he hadn't even been home. So it was a total and complete waste of time. Some weeks later, actually, I had read somewhere that if you turn on the gas, you just go to sleep, right? So I sent the kids back to their grandparents, and I decided, my cunning mind, that I would turn the gas jets on Now you have to understand, David was a stay away from home drunk. I never knew when he was going to show up. Might be a day, 2 days, or a week. But he was going to show up this night. I was going to turn on all the gas jets. He was a cigar smoker. He was going to come in from the garage, walk into the den, and he was going to be blown to kingdom come. Kids were gone. I go to turn on the gas jets, and we're living in an all-electric house. Nothing wrong with me, thank you very much. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I was on my way home from work one night, and I knew I had to see him. And as I say, I had no idea where he was or when he was coming in. And there are no coincidences, as we know in here, because when I got in from the office, he was sitting in the den and he was fairly sober. And I told him I wanted to talk to him. Now, you know, it wasn't the first time I'd had a little chat with him. I'd had many. And he looked at me with such disgust, and he said, "What's it about this time?" This time I was different. I was as quiet as I am right now. And I told him that I no longer cared. I no longer cared what he did, when, where, how, or with whom, that he was no longer a part of my life. That just as soon as both of the boys were gone, I would be gone. I turned around that night, I walked into my room and closed my bedroom door, and I went to bed and I slept for the first night through. First night in I cannot tell you how many. If you were like I was, you'd go to bed and pretend to be asleep, and if you heard the car drive up, you're jumping up, looking out the window. If it is him, you're jumping back into bed and pretending to be asleep. Unbelievable, the games we play. Unbelievable. That night I slept, and I've been sleeping ever since. I had no idea what had happened to me until I got to you. But I know that particular night that God was doing for me what I was incapable of doing for myself. I had gone as far down that ladder as I could go. I was in that hole so deep that if I didn't start climbing back, I wouldn't make it. I wouldn't make it. I couldn't take any more. And that's the way it was. For the next 6 months, we didn't have any communication at all. If something needed to be said, I left him a note, or he left a response to me, and that's the way it was. It's not a very happy way to live, but I could handle that more than I could handle anything else, because, you see, little did I know that that's when I let go and let God have that trunk. I didn't know that. No idea. And my phone rang in my office one day, and you know who? He said, "I'm going to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous," and I said, "Be my guest," and I hung up. Because, you see, I didn't care. I had to get to the point where I did not care whether he lived or whether he died in order for me to survive. I was in Louisiana a few weeks ago, and I had a drunk walk up to me and said, "You are the first person other than my wife that I have ever heard say that." He said, "It got me sober." I didn't have a thing in the world to do with David getting sober. I had to survive. I know that. I know that. My phone rang in my office, as I say, one day, and told me he was going to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I said, "Be my guest," and I hung up. I didn't care. I did not care. We didn't have meetings like you do today. There wasn't a meeting that night. And when I walked in, he was sitting in the den and he was sober. We had no communication. He called me back in the office the next day and said, "I'm going to that meeting," and he got the same response, "Be my guest," and I hung up. I got home that night and he was dressed and walking out the door. Our older son was in the University of Texas at the time, and Donnie finished in high school. He said, "Mom, do you think Dad really means it?" And I said, "We won't know till Dad comes home." And that was April 21, 1967. And he came home from that day until the day he went to the big meeting. That was a Friday night. His first meeting was an open speaker meeting. The following Friday, he asked me if I'd like to go with him. Now, this is somebody who didn't care whether he lived or died, right? I beat him to the car. I couldn't wait to see what you people were. because you had done something that the kids and I hadn't been incapable of doing. You'd cleaned him up. He'd been taking a bath every night, changing his clothes from the inside out. Our program was one of attraction rather than promotion, right? That's what attracted me. Any way we can get us here, let's get us here. I walked into that meeting that night, and I fell in love with Alcoholics Anonymous. And I feel the same way today that I did back over 34 years ago. Because I walked into a room full of happy people, and they were dressed beautifully. They smelled good, and they were laughing. It was just such a wonderful feeling. Back then, I want you to know, we dressed like we were going to the greatest cocktail party in the city. The gals had on their finest, and the guys all had on their funeral suits. And it was grand. I mean, we dressed like we were going someplace. We were going to a meeting. On Monday night, he said, how would you like to go to an Al-Anon meeting? And I said, what's that? He said, I haven't any idea, but I think it's for you. And I attended my first Al-Anon meeting, and I will never forget it, and I share it, whether it's 1 people or 1,000, because I walked into a room full of the most pious broads I've ever encountered. And those women were so good that I literally wanted to throw up. We had a group sitting over here doing needlepoint or knitting. I didn't do either one. I needlepoint today, but not in meetings. We had a group over here that were all excited about a new jelly recipe. I don't think making jelly is a requirement for Al-Anon. They talked about how good they were to their drunks. They talked about making sure they got in their jammies and got to bed so they wouldn't wake up on the floor. I wanted mine dead in the gutter. They talked about making sure that they ate properly because they didn't want them to be sick. I wanted mine to starve to death. You and I, when we call ourselves members of Alcoholics Anonymous or Al-Anon, have accepted a responsibility of honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. A responsibility of sharing our experience, our strength, our hope, our fears. We walk in here scared to death because we don't know what we're walking into. A lot of people think we're a cult, and that's okay. If this is a cult, I'm all for it. The healthiest one I've ever heard of or ever known. What a responsibility. We can't promise that new guy or gal that everything is going to be wonderful, because it may not be. That drunk may have to die. I've seen it happen in my years in the program. It's not very joyous. But what we can promise is that no situation is so difficult and no unhappiness too great that it cannot be overcome. And how does that happen? Through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and the recovery therein. How blessed we are to have that recipe for living, that the drunks so generously shared with us their program and said, here it is, use it. And here we are 50 years later still using it. Aren't we lucky? Aren't we lucky? I stayed in that group for 4 years because I didn't know I could go someplace else. You know, we don't hear till we hear, and we don't see till we see, do we? And I was in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, Canada in 1970, and heard a drunk from North Carolina, I've heard him many times since, who said, if you don't think your group's the best one, get yourself another. He was talking to me that night. And I knew that I wasn't going back to that group. I told Dad on the way home that I was going to try something else, another group, not leave Al-Anon, but I had to go someplace. And I walked into the Preston group the following Monday, and it was my home for the next 24 years. I walked into a group of honest, open-minded people who shared with me and said, you don't graduate. We don't give diplomas in here. It's up to you. And I wonder, and I imagine Millie does too, we were talking today with her 39 years. Where are the long-timers? Where are they? Do we get good before we get well? Is that the reason we walk away from the program? I hope not. Because I want people there for when my kids come along, my granddaughters, God forbid, if they need it. I want the long-timers there. So they can give to them what was given to me so freely. So freely. That group was a wonderful group, and I didn't tell you my first sponsor was a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous because I couldn't identify with those women. And I thought I belonged in AA because, you see, I drank with him, and I drank without him, and I drank alone. But alcohol never did to with and for me what it does for the alcoholic. Sean mentioned that this afternoon in his talk. It made me sick if I drank too much, and it also made me drunk, and I didn't like those feelings. Thank you very much. But I had certainly drunk a lot more than most of those gals in that AA group. And I told Chris this, and she said, okay. She went in the office and came back with my first big book and opened it up to chapter 4. And it says, if you honestly want to and cannot quit entirely, or if in drinking you have little control over the amount that you take, you're probably alcoholic. She said, does that fit you? It didn't. So I had to keep going to those sappy meetings. When I got to you people at the Preston group, I got totally involved. I became a GR, a DR. I became an Alanon sponsor for 6 years, and I learned so much from those kids. I learned about loving for free with no strings attached. Unconditional love. What a grand group of young people they are. They taught me a great, great deal. I went as far as alternate delegate, and I knew that was not my forte, so I backed off. I have remained in service. By that I mean I am at meetings at least twice a week, sometimes 3. I sponsor people constantly, and I am sponsored. Both of my sponsors are now in the big meeting. But I have a very dear friend with 41 years of Al-Anon, and we sponsor each other. And it's grand. She lives in East Texas. She comes in once a month, and we just dump it all on each other. And it's great. And if you haven't got a sponsor, please get one. Please get one. We need that closeness. Closeness. My husband was a past delegate. He was trustee at large, and I guess is known throughout the U.S. and Canada as well as any member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He carried the message every way in the world, from the history to the traditions to the story to the steps, the whole 9 yards. So well loved. And on July 20th, 98, I got up to take a meeting to one of the early morning groups and dressed and went in to wake him so I wouldn't be late to the office, and he had died in his sleep. And on the way to the phone to call 911, I did something that I didn't know that I would do. Didn't know where it came from, of course I do today. I said, thank you, God. Because this was a man that was so filled with fire and so vibrant. He came running into Alcoholics Anonymous, and he never put the brakes on from the day he never said no one time in all the years that he was in the program. He was constantly involved. And I know that he could not have lived by being ill. It would not have worked. And so I thank God for that. I wasn't ready for it, and I know he sure as heck wasn't. We'd both been at conventions that weekend. He was in Arkansas and I was in Louisiana, and we'd had a good time sharing our experiences of the weekend. And I put in a call to Donnie, and he was there before I could almost hang up. He was in his car when they got a hold of him, and he was on the next flight into Dallas. And our older son was not able to make it for a couple of days because they live in Missoula, Montana, and they couldn't get a flight out. There was only one flight out, and they got there a couple of days later. But I want you to know that within 30 minutes after I called 911, I was surrounded. And it's been like that ever since. I have not been alone in over 3 years. I've not been allowed to be, because you all have been there. David and I have no family in Dallas at all. At all.
except AA and Al-Anon, and they have been my great, great supporters. And I know that without them, I couldn't have made it. I just couldn't. And Donnie and my brother had been after me for a couple of years to move to Denver. And I was very hesitant. Donnie and I went to Denver a few weeks ago, and we talked about it again, and the decision's been made, and by this time next month, I will be a new resident of Denver, Colorado. And I'm very apprehensive. I'm not fearful. Just at my age, it's kind of hard to start over, but that's what I'm fixing to do. And I have a very lovely condominium to move into, thanks to my family, and it'll be a whole new adventure. Thomas Wood, I think, said, you can't go home again. Well, don't ever tell an Al-Anon you can't do something. Because I'm going to defy it, and I'm going to try it and see. And I can always go back to Dallas if necessary. But I need to be close to blood kin. I know that. Donnie lives here in Chicago, but he gets to see me quite frequent, and he'll get to see me more in Denver. Young David is an attorney and practices in, he doesn't practice, he's the attorney for the University of Montana in Missoula, and he teaches law school, and he has fulfilled every dream that he's ever had. He loves academia, and that's all he's ever wanted. And he's happy as a clam. He gave us the daughter-in-law that we always, always wanted. Couldn't love her any more if I'd had her myself. And then they gave us 2 beautiful granddaughters. And Abby just entered New York University 2 weeks before September 11. And we were really panicked. She's only 6 blocks from the disaster area, and one way and 12 the other. But she was able to get a call through to her mother and say, I'm okay. I was able to talk to her the following Thursday, and she said, Grandma, I'm fine. I'm fine. A little scary, but I'm fine. She's such a wonderful little girl. Here she is, she's a freshman, and she won't even be 17 till November. She's an amazing child. And her little sister's 11, going on 35, and we're saving a seat for her on the AA side. She is so full of the Dickens that she's just something else. The 2 girls are absolutely opposite in personalities. So I want you all to be here when she gets ready. I'll tell you that. They all both know about alcoholism. They both know Grandpa was an alcoholic. And they have accepted and loved us. And they are much more knowledgeable about it. I have so very, very much to be thankful for. Most of all, Alcoholics Anonymous, Al-Anon, and Alateen, for giving me a way of life that's indescribably wonderful. And for this, I thank you. Thank you. Thank you.